The case of alleged sexual abuse at Jakarta International School has generated media coverage worldwide since it surfaced in 2014. The bizarre allegations, inconsistencies in the investigation, and the unfair trial are all just part of this travesty of justice. So how do supporters of the accused, 6 school cleaning staff and 2 teachers, know with certainty that they are innocent? Despite allegations that the cleaners gang raped a young student multiple times during the school day for over a year, the child shows no physical or emotional signs of abuse and continued attending school. The sole claim for the boy's abuse was an inconclusive result from a lab test for the herpes virus that did not prove the boy had contracted this sexually transmitted disease. The mother believed the test did because it was positive for IgM, a temporary antibody which is produced when the body is first exposed to bacteria or virus. But only conclusive positive IgG results could prove the boy had had the herpes virus. The IgG antibody is produced when the body is developing a long-term immunity to a bacteria or virus, such as herpes, and is an indication of a recent or past infection. The boy tested negative for IgG in his initial test. The mother was to return to the clinic for a follow-up test, but did not show up. Instead, she took the initial and inconclusive test to the police, convinced the investigators it was a positive result, and demanded an investigation. Soon after, the cleaners were questioned and charged. They were allegedly tortured into confessing, and photo evidence suggests this. One of the cleaners, Azwar, died in police custody on the day of his interrogation. Police say he committed suicide by drinking floor cleaner, but it's likely that he died from torture. The National Police Commission, a government body which receives citizens' input and complaints about the police's performance, has been running an investigation into the alleged torture of Azwar. A lawsuit was launched against the school by the first mother and was weakened by the fact that the cleaners were outsourced and not employed by the school itself. Only at this point was the school's administrator, Neil Bantelman, and teaching assistant, Ferdi Cheong, made suspects, and the lawsuit increased tenfold to $125 million. The extraordinary and sometimes impossible allegations against Neil and Ferdi made by the parents of the 3 students, including the first mother, were backed up by no physical evidence whatsoever. Neil and Ferdi were accused of sodomizing the same boys as the cleaners, regularly over a year, and returning them to class or the playground after each alleged incident. But the boys displayed no indication that anything had occurred, and even more bizarrely, the abuse allegedly took place during the school day, in a busy school office with transparent glass walls. The story became more illogical when the mother said that a blue potion was administered and a magical stone was conjured from thin air to anesthetize one of the boys. Further medical exams of the boys in Jakarta and one in Singapore showed no physical signs that they had ever been sexually abused. So given the overwhelming evidence in favour of Neil, Ferdi and the cleaners, why were they convicted? The answer? Judges allowed the prosecution in the cleaners' trial to use inconclusive lab reports for herpes as the basis of their evidence and withheld the medical evidence in support of their innocence from the defence. Since the cleaners' trial, there have been 2 more lab test results on the boy for herpes that were negative for IgG and confirmed that the child does not have the STD. And to date, no examination of the boys has ever identified any signs of the herpes infection or sexual assault. Neither of these 2 lab tests were made available to the defence in any of the criminal trials. In Neil and Ferdi's trial, the medical examination from Singapore, which showed no evidence of sexual abuse, was deliberately excluded from evidence by the judges, who registered convictions anyway, despite the lack of evidence or any eyewitnesses. Earlier this year, Neil, Ferdi and the school won a defamation lawsuit against one of the mothers in Singapore after a court concluded that they found no evidence of sexual abuse. In July, the lawyer of the first mother, who was suing the school for $125 million and was investigated by Indonesia's Anti-Corruption Commission and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Neil, Ferdi and the cleaners are innocent, not only beyond reasonable doubt, but beyond any conceivable doubt whatsoever. Since this all began, 7 innocent people's lives have been ruined. 1 innocent man is dead, and their families have been devastated, all because of a baseless accusation backed by outrageous financial motives. Supporters of Neil, Ferdi and the cleaners have been and are still fighting for the truth to be revealed and justice to prevail. In July 2015, the Supreme Court in Singapore ordered one of the mothers to pay 130,000 Singapore dollars in damages to Neil and Ferdy for defamation and $100,000 to JIS and an elementary school principal. The mother did not appeal the decision. On July 28, the Supreme Court turned down the appeal of the cleaners. Then, on August 10th, the $125 million civil case was rejected by the South Jakarta District Court. On August 10th, the High Court overturned the District Court's verdict and fully acquitted Neil and Ferdy, and they were released from Chippendale Prison on August 14th. The lawyers for the cleaners will request a judicial review of their case. In a shocking reversal, on the 24th of February 2016, an Indonesian Supreme Court panel, less than 2 days after it was named, overturned the High Court's acquittal of Neil Bantelman and Ferdy Tiong. Justices produced the verdict despite a lack of evidence, no adult witnesses, dubious allegations, highly irregular legal proceedings, and ample reason for doubt. Ferdy was rearrested at home in the middle of the night by armed police, his eldest daughter and wife witnessing the whole ordeal. Neil and his wife Tracy were in Bali on holiday. Neil willingly returned to Jakarta in the hands of prosecutors late the following night. Neil and Ferdy have now been imprisoned once again and are currently detained in a long-term prison called Lapas Chippendale. The conditions in this prison are deplorable. Neil, Ferdy, and the 5 innocent custodial staff have one last hope for justice, a special form of appeal called a judicial review. The panel of judges for the judicial review will examine the case closely for legal flaws and errors. New evidence is required for the review, and there is plenty of new evidence. In November 2015, the first mother, who now resides in Belgium, agreed to have one last blood test done on her child as part of an investigative documentary produced by a television network in Canada. The test result came back negative, proving that her son had never had herpes. But after his 5th blood test, the first mother still claims her son has herpes and was sexually abused at JIS. The Canadian government issued this statement in response to Neil and Ferdy's rearrest. The Honourable Stéphane Dion, Minister of Foreign Affairs, has stated, "The government of Canada is deeply dismayed and shocked that the Supreme Court of Indonesia has overturned the Jakarta High Court's acquittal of Neil Bantelman and his Indonesian co-accused Ferdy Tiong based on a lack of evidence. This decision is unjust, given the many grave irregularities through the various proceedings in the case and the fact that all evidence presented by the defence has systematically been rejected. Mr. Bantelman and Mr. Tiong were not provided the opportunity to demonstrate their innocence. Despite Canada's repeated calls for due process, this case was not handled in a fair and transparent manner. The outcome of this case has serious implications for Indonesia's reputation as a safe place for Canadians to work, travel, and invest, as well as for Canada's long history of cooperation with Indonesia. The US Ambassador to Indonesia, Robert Blake, also expressed disappointment over the verdict, saying the outcome of the legal process would impact international views about the rule of law in Indonesia. "We are shocked and disappointed by the decision announced by the Supreme Court to sentence 2 international school teachers," Blake said. It is not clear what evidence the Supreme Court used to overturn the High Court's decision. Then, on April 13th, 2 prominent NGOs in Indonesia, Kontras and MAPI, held a press conference. They released a book based on the results of an examination of the JIS case. They made several significant findings regarding the case and how it was handled. The book concludes that the legal process of this case is rife with manipulations, and there is no evidence to support the claims of sexual abuse at JIS. They have recommended the case be frozen and the alleged suspects compensated by the state. Please share this story and your support for these innocent men and women who have suffered a grave injustice long enough and need our help. The fight for justice continues.